Hi, I'm Michael, and I am, as you can see, a white male. I teach music, I teach about world cultures, and I also teach a race and ethnicity course. And so you might think that I'm anti racist or I'm DEJI, what we call diversity, equity, justice, and inclusive, sensitively trained, and that I know Black lives truly matter, right? Well, on one level, of course, but on so many more, I must dig out of the trench of privilege, assumptions, and racist values many of our ancestors created and failed to address, in direct proportion to the efforts people of color must exert to defend their integrity and uplift themselves against the barriers my privileges impose on them. So here's a few thoughts about why Black and colored lives should matter more, and why those of us with what many call white privilege must learn to embrace hardship, including the difficulty of hearing that word white privilege and figuring out what does that mean to us, emotional pain and sacrificing of our time and resources to retrain ourselves, not just for the well-being of our colleagues of color, but for our own, quite frankly, as well. Let's see where this goes. As a teacher in colleges and universities, as a white male, I've had a wonderfully privileged life. I've gotten virtually every job I wanted or applied for. I've seen myself and my experiences reflected in virtually all the curriculum I was expected to teach. Most institutions are run by people like me. Far more of my colleagues are like me than not. The world is in fact run by folks like me, most often on the values of folks like me. And though I was never trained as a DEJI educator, that is, someone who supposedly can teach every single student in my class with sensitivity to their diverse intelligences, experiences, and cultural assets, it never mattered because I was well read, including on topics of race and ethnicity. I knew my subjects. I could quote from those articles. I knew how to speak respectfully to students for the most part, and I met all tenurable requirements. But in truth, more often than I can count, my Black, Native, and non-white colleagues worked harder, sacrificed more, and were often better at all this than myself. Tia Brown McNair writes in From Equity Talk to Equity Walk, whiteness is a pervasive condition of higher education that determines, albeit most invisibly, the processes by which things get done. Every time a new event occurs in our society or in our world where a young Black man or woman is killed because he or she is wearing a hoodie, or solely because he or she is large or simply Black or Black male very often, and in the wrong place at the wrong time, or because she's home sleeping, I'm reminded how deep, divided, and inequitable our society and our world is, how toxic racism is to Black, Native, and all men and women of color, and how much more energy people of color must exert to watch where they go, to watch what they say, how they look, and how much more to successfully climb the ladders in all of our institutions, which are built primarily on European American values, and how invisible and toxic many of these values are to Black, Indigenous, and historically dehumanized populations. Never ever had a conversation with my parents about how to act in public as might affect my safety or my life, what dangers might be out there. And yet every day, Black and all non-white parents are forced to turn to their young boys and girls, men and women, and coach them on how to stay safe, knowing their coaching might still not bring them home alive, something my parents never worried about. So how did we get there? The manner by which imperialism, holocausts, democides, dehumanization, slavery, the toxic institutionalization of patriarchy, and competitive capitalism and exceptionalist, culturally centric practices became embedded into our world's cultures, became the causes of racism, and now everywhere in our society impact the lives of people of color, our institutions, our children, and most certainly our collective future, is the issue we must discuss. There is a subliminal suffering to conscience by choosing to live in privilege or not sacrifice for the privileges of people of color. You see, until all non-white lives matter more, until equity and justice is established, determined by the standards of people of color, white conscience can never be free. So that may sound strange that white consciences cannot be free if people of color are not honored and given the respect that they inherently deserve. But here's the problem, and I'll speak for me only. With each reminder of inequity and racism, a hole is torn in my conscience. My emotions may flare. I might say something like, oh, that's terrible. And for a moment, a day, a week, or at least for a while, I might feel bad. I might introduce a new article or a video in my class on the topic of whatever that might be. But then I'm fully capable of returning to my privilege, of never really having done anything of substance, and can easily go back to my way of life. I had spoken out on injustice, right? So I've done my part. But how in the world can daily reminders that our society is so deeply inequitable, and my Black and Native and Mexican and now Asian, non-white and always women colleagues can endure dehumanization, invisibility, and harassment on such a scale ever make me feel that thinking or feeling bad for a moment and talking my way around the problem actually solves the problem? How do words change our values and our institutions? And frankly, how do institutions change racism? They don't. This is on us as individuals. It's on me and the time I commit out of my daily life. If not, problems keep getting deferred to the next generation. I return to my privilege and Black lives still don't matter. We must try to understand. Intentions, sympathy, or speech and action are not the same. It's simple math how we got here, isn't it? Math. Thousands of years in the evolution of imperialism and patriarchy, plus men placing and conquering others and aggressive behavior in opposition to their humanity, giving in to their fears or far worse, their greed, plus creating a habit of competing for capital, competitive capitalism, at any cost to indigenous cultures, plus hundreds of years of dehumanizing those we conquer, because you can't conquer someone if you don't justify it, equals the institutionalization of racism and dehumanizing values in the fabric of everything, and most horrendously, what and how we teach. When money, property, and power are more important than humanity, we can justify and sustain nearly anything. History has proven that no matter the cost to our own humanity, justifying something is essential in order to continue to perpetuate the dehumanization. Now, how does this carry forward? Remember, in war, and let's make no mistake about it, our world is in a war of morality. You have to dehumanize those you're at war with. And to hold privilege over other humans is a form of dehumanization. So now we have 400 plus years of practicing these mindsets. Like a muscle we've been working out for nearly 5 centuries, it is so strong. So these values of privilege and of inequity are embedded into our colonized, enslaved, and decidedly culturally centric institutions everywhere. Remember, when we create a lie, a construct, or a grievous injustice, as in massacre or displacement of millions of mothers and brothers and fathers and sisters over hundreds of years, you either have to own the injustice and devote your life to offset it, or you deny and hide it. Unfortunately, that's what our ancestors chose to do. So, enough about our ancestors. Let's talk about us, because we're the ones that have to reverse this. Well, we certainly have to pause for a second and comment. Of course, all lives matter. One day when we have equity, we can say, think, and act proudly, all lives matter. But why do Black lives matter now more? Why do Native and Indigenous lives matter now more? Why do Roma, Jewish, Muslim, Asian, or women, and anyone in any location who's being dehumanized, patronized, trivialized, and excluded from equity and justice, why do their lives matter now more? And the answer is simply, none of our lives matter until all of our lives matter. And that means equitably. I like to think that when you walk into a room, you want to say, where am I in this room? And if the people like you, whether by gender or race, are in the front of the room, they're the ones giving the talks, they're the ones making the decisions, they're the ones that hold the majority of the power of the resources, then you have to learn to take a step back. And this is where you begin through action to begin to the process of reversing dehumanization and inequity. But to arrive at equity, someone must sacrifice their power and privilege. And well, I have to believe that that starts with me. White males, females everywhere, descendants of the colonizers, conquerors, controllers, practitioners of patriarchy, racism, and inequity, there is a cost to privilege. Paulo Freire writes in The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, concern for humanization leads at once to the recognition of dehumanization as a historical reality. And as an individual perceives the extent of dehumanization, he or she may ask if humanization is a viable possibility. But dehumanization is a concern of both those whose humanity has been stolen, but also, though in a different way, those who have stolen it. Now we can enter Newton's third law, which is for every action and force in nature, there's an equal and opposite reaction. We've been living the myths of racial dehumanization and ethnic inequality, of male dominance and of competitive capitalism, and religious, racial, cultural, and even value or disciplinary exceptionalism for hundreds, even thousands of years. The force needed to create equity must now be exerted. And in doing so, white privilege, inequity, and injustice becomes a historical reference and not a present condition. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote, "Never ever be afraid to do what's right, especially if the well-being of a person or animal is at stake. Society's punishments are small compared to the wounds we inflict on our soul when we look the other way." So, if you've listened this far, great. But if you're white, this may sound like a lot of work, doesn't it? As I make this presentation, I'm very aware all of our lives may be challenging. We are human, get sick, we have problems, and frankly, we must all be really worn down by the long histories of conflict and racial division. Often we may feel that this history is being blamed on us, and of course, we were not around when the dehumanization of millions of folks evolved to the problem we have today. But we are here now, and it's still happening. And so therefore, we can either be accomplices to among the longest, most devastating and prolonged injustices in modern human history, racism, or devote our lives to correct it. How do we want to be remembered? A lot of the good things in my life have come from my small and inadequate attempts to learn from people of color and to move in the equal and opposite direction of their challenges, for which I acquire the influence of their creative, dignified, magnificent, and brilliant lives. But I know as I work my way through the stages of growth needed to become equitable and inclusive, I cannot be afraid to make mistakes. On my path to being a suitable supporter of equity, I will at times have to lean into discomfort and know that my discomfort will never equal the hardship or pain experienced by that other person of color. And the rewards to my conscience and acceptance by cultures of color will be in direct proportion to my efforts. To my mentors and friends of color, your examples have given me the gifts of resilience, integrity, strength, and patience, as well as humility I otherwise would never have known. And finally, most especially to my wife, Leonie, and her family, and to our beloved son, Brandon, the gifts of your lives have taught me I can never, ever overcome my privilege or grow to help equity and justice if I am not around the folks I believe deserve that equity daily. You both have increased my vigilance of my tendencies towards arrogance, privilege, and insensitivity. Plus, you have modeled an enormous capacity to endure hardship, find joy from pain and discomfort, and remain connected and sensitive to the hardships of others, something I never would have done on my own and still wouldn't do if I were not around you last time. I hope in some way that this short discussion empowers even one other white faculty, teacher, parent, or colleague to accept that, at least for our lifetimes, Black and lives of folks of color must matter more, and that our efforts will be rewarded.